Hello, and welcome to Church at Home with Rachel for Wednesday, the 21st of June. Today we are celebrating in Canada National Indigenous Peoples Day. And in some places we can refer to this as also a National Indigenous Day of Prayer, which we celebrate in our congregation with Frog Lake on Sunday. So I'm wearing my Every Child Matters shirt here that I picked up a couple years ago when we moved to Alberta, and we really are celebrating Orange Shirt Day in September. But I'm wearing it today in solidarity with my Indigenous siblings and Creator. I think this is a really important thing to talk about today because simply that when we gather as Canadians, and I think as Americans as well, we have to acknowledge our history. We have to acknowledge. I'm having computer issues today. I'm sorry. I apologize. We have to acknowledge the reality, the truth of where we come from. And one of the realities that we sometimes struggle with, and I don't know about my friends in the States or people from other places around the world, but one of the things we've been sort of grappling with for the past 20 or 30 years, sincerely grappling with, is this sense of the need for truth and reconciliation. Based on the model of truth and reconciliation that was begun because of apartheid in South Africa, Canada has undertaken that process. And many years ago, they went across the country holding hearings in different big cities across the country where people could come and gather, and Indigenous peoples, particularly those who had lived and survived residential schools, could come and tell their story. Because there's an important aspect of telling your story. When you carry something inside you, when you carry a secret, or you carry a shame, or you carry, it can even be a good thing, but if you carry it inside you, it's yours alone. And for with good things, carrying something good inside you, it's like you want to bubble up and burst out. You find out you got straight A's on your report card, or you get a scholarship to university, or you win the lottery, and it's so hard not to tell somebody. And there might be reasons why you don't, but it's good news and you want to share it with somebody. It's the rare person, I think, that is really able to really focus and keep that good news to themselves. Well, an odd thing happens when it's something negative or something that we have been trained to feel shame about. We carry it inside ourselves. And I think that when we carry bad news inside ourselves, it's kind of like a cancer. It eats, the bad stuff eats away at the good stuff until it feels like there's nothing good left over. And for the Indigenous peoples who suffered through the residential schools, regardless of how they became about, or what was the people who did things to them, or what happened to them after the residential schools, the fact of them is something that those Indigenous peoples have to live with. And for so many years, they felt they had to live with it inside them, that no one would listen to them, that their voice was not one that was worthy of being heard. And that, I think, is a directly correlated to or related to the residential schools. They were taught to be ashamed. Not all, I acknowledge that, but the vast majority of children who were taken to residential schools were trained to be ashamed of who they were as Indigenous peoples. Their hair was cut. They were physically, in some cases, um, maimed, injured, beaten, awful things done to them if they spoke their tongue, their mother tongue. In lots of cases, they did not speak English. And until they could learn this other language, they were punished for speaking their own language. They were separated from siblings, taken away from families, in some cases not ever going to be able to go back home. The atrocities that happened to some children are horrific. Even just the plain fact that children were taken away from their homes and placed in schools that were not meant to be kind and caring and actually less institutions of learning and compassion, but rather institutions of stripping away the Indian out of Indigenous peoples, tells us right there what these people were carrying inside themselves. And if you've ever had to carry, a diagnosis of something, for instance, if you're diagnosed with cancer or something and you have no one to tell, you have no one to go home to and say, I'm scared. I don't know what's going to happen. I don't know what's going to do. It eats up inside you. Or if, there's something about you that you feel ashamed of, that you feel like you're shamed at school or at work, that the way you responded to something was looked down upon, and, or even something as simple as telling children that they can't sing. I grew up for years thinking that there was no way I should sing in public because somebody in my early years told me to stop singing. I didn't have a good voice. I was ashamed of my voice. Now, I admit I will not probably ever lead worship music or lead singing, and I am nervous about singing in front of other people. But I don't think it's because I have a bad voice. I think it's because I feel ashamed of my voice because of years of being told, or perceiving that I was told, that that was not, like, I had to hide that part of me. And that's a part of me. I love music, and that's a part of me that has festered inside and made me feel like the thing that I love very much cannot be a public part of who I am because of shame. Well, that's like this tiny, tiny microscopic size compared to the physical, mental, sexual abuse, emotional, spiritual abuse that happened to so many children at residential schools. And even before residential schools, what happened when settlers and colonials came into this country that was not ours. We may have come here for good reasons, like we were being disease or drought or, all the reasons immigration happens. But coming to this new place, a big mistake happened in that there was not an acknowledgement that there were already people living here, living their lives. And some people will argue that, well, they were warring, like they weren't peaceful, kind, all Indians were not peaceful and kind and, sharing everything. Well, of course not. Neither are we. Look at our world. Like, we are not ones to cast stones about whether or not people you get along with your neighbors. Okay. Like, let's leave that alone. But the fact is, we came into a place where there were already people existing, and in some cases, in many cases, walked right over them, brought disease, brought illness. In some cases, built relationships and ways of working together, and learned to live off the land from them. But in too many cases, we did damage. We did, we caused an extermination of whole groups of people, and we certainly did a huge damage to their culture, to their language, to their way of being. Kind of like what we're doing with climate change these days. We are exterminating whole ways of people's lives, not just our own, but people who still live off the land and do things like that. So on this National Indigenous Peoples Day, we take time to remember. We take time to tell the stories. We'll take time in September on Orange Shirt Day to wear our orange shirts. But this is another day when we need to take time and listen. On my radio station at work, there's an awesome, like, I can't find country music other than on Sirius XM here. Like, I can't get it to tune in without static. But in my office in Vermilion, there is a radio station that comes from a First Nation. And it's incredible. It's got oldies and the new stuff is great. And they keep advertising that on today at this one place, at this one particular place in Edmonton. They're having a celebration from 11 to 1 or 1:30 for Indigenous Peoples Day, where they're going to have drummers and dancers and traditional foods, and people can come and learn. I think that's what we need to do. We need to learn. I was speaking earlier about the Truth and Reconciliation Council going across the country and listening to people tell their stories. It was so important that they are able to tell their stories, because when the story is not, when you can't let the story out, when you can't tell your truth, it festers. And for so many, many people, they were shamed into keeping that truth to themselves. And the Truth and Reconciliation Commission gave them permission to speak their truth, to tell their story. And it caused the rest of us, called on all of the rest of us who are non-Indigenous Canadians to sit down and keep our mouths shut and open our ears, that we might listen to stories that are hard to hear, that we might not that we feel guilty, not that we start yelling mea culpa, and, and beating our breasts, but that we might recognize the role that we play in um, continued prejudice against Indigenous peoples, that we might discover the ways that our ancestors made mistakes and did things, sometimes intentionally, oftentimes unintentionally, and yet what happened because of our ancestors have caused their ancestors, and indeed through the lineage, these folks that are here today, to be in pain. And we cannot take their pain away, but we can work to create a world in which their children won't feel pain. But the first step in doing that is acknowledging and listening and finding out what exactly is it that they are saying. I think there's a lot of assumptions by white Canadians about what it is that Indigenous peoples are saying when they say, listen to my truth. And this is what I mean by reparations or reconciliation or truth. We need to stop panicking about what might be asked or demanded of us and simply sit in this moment. On Monday, I talked about holding the baby, being present in this moment to what it is we're dealing with. Today, all of us non-Indigenous Canadians need to take this opportunity to sit with the baby, to listen to the cries of the baby in our arms. Listen to the truth that is being spoken, the stories that are being shared. Not with an ear or an eye toward fixing it or getting mad about how dare you expect me to deal with this, it wasn't my fault. None of that. We need to simply sit with the baby and listen and learn. And then walk away thinking about a new way forward. How might we help others to sit and hold the baby? How might we be able to place that child on the ground or with their own parent and be able to say, how can I help? What steps can I take to ensure that this never happens again? It's been a big week. Juneteenth on Monday, National Indigenous Peoples Day today. It's a good time as we enter into the season of summer to think about how we might change, how we might make things better. And sometimes that begins with simply listening. So I invite you today to take some time to go to an Indigenous Peoples Day celebration, or to go online, or to pick up a book written by an Indigenous person, to read something, to listen to a blog or a vlog, to do something that allows you time to simply sit and listen, observe, absorb, and recognize what it is that this other group of people have gone through. Tomorrow we can start working on how do we deal with it? How do we change it? But today, let's just hold the baby. Let's just sit. Let's just rock this baby as the stories are told and the tears fall and the anger is expressed and the hope of truth being told is released into the world. May God bless you. And may God bless our Indigenous brothers and sisters around the world and in Canada today.